I call this the inevitable ethical quagmire. What's a quagmire?
The guy from Family Guy?
No. What's a quagmire?
It's like a rock thing, isn't it?
No.
A Kraken rocks.
Huh?
It's like a Kraken rocks?
No. No.
It's like a turtle?
It's a mess.
Okay.
It's just a mess, okay? Now, I say it's inevitable because we're already doing this. And we'll get into how we actually are doing this and what the future might hold here. But it's been quite interesting. There have been many books written about this for decades, okay? Anybody know what The Boys from Brazil is about?
I know I read it at one point.
You did?
But, yeah.
Well, before Hitler died, they took some cells and they eventually cloned him. They cloned Hitler, and then they they found families that were similar to the family he grew up in and just implanted those clones into those families, and hopefully they'd get another Hitler.
Is that real or fiction?
Fiction.
I was like, that's concerning.
Yeah. Robin Cook has written a couple of books about this, and Tom Clancy has written a book, Power Plays, called BioStrike. So, anyway, it's been the topic of fiction for a long time. So we're going to talk first of all here about the Human Genome Project. A couple of goals. First, to map and sequence the human genome. This was completed in about 2001. There were still a few sequences they couldn't get at, but they were not protein coding areas. And the map means being able to assign to different positions on the chromosomes where these genes are, where they occur. Now, they wanted to also map and sequence the genomes of important model organisms. What do you think those might be? Model organisms.
Like testing subjects? Like,
Well, what kind of organisms are used in biological research?
rats, mice?
Rats, mice, Drosophila fruit flies.
I didn't know that.
They were the subjects of numerous tests in the early 1900s, and we did all kinds of nasty things you might remember to those fruit flies. Now, to collect and distribute the data, and they spent put about 5% of the money aside for studying the ethical, legal, and social implications. Now, it turns out that not a whole lot was really done with that money. So what are fruits? Well, if we're able to detect genes that we know cause various diseases, if we're able to locate those genes, we can screen newborns for, do they have any of these genetic diseases? We'd also screen for if someone is a carrier. Anybody remember what a carrier is?
Oh, carrier disease?
Uh-huh. Yeah. If, for instance, cystic fibrosis, in order to have the disease, you have to have both copies of the defective gene. If you have one good copy and one defective, you're a carrier. You don't express anything of the disease at all. But that's a carrier. But you're able to pass it on to someone. Gene therapy. Now what this is if we're able to understand what the gene is that's causing the problem, might we be able to take a normal gene and insert that so that we can alleviate the problem? Gene-based therapy, chronic myelogenous leukemia, is due to joining chromosomes 9 and 22, causing an abnormal protein that can be blocked by a specific drug. It's also hoped that we might be able, with cancers, if we're able to identify the various genes involved that mutated to cause the cancer, we might be able to come up with a more specific treatment that would target those genes and not have to basically chemotherapy is poisoning your body. Poison it just long enough so you don't die, but your cancer cells are depleted, and you keep doing that, but you have to recover. So there are some biblical principles involved. First of all, we are created in God's image. Therefore, we are distinct from the animals. We have an exhortation to be fruitful and multiply. And so those who are unable to have children naturally, they will turn to other means, if possible, to have a child of their own. And we are fallen creatures, so we can't always trust our judgment. Whatever imperfections we have are used by God. Now, as you're well aware, Mrs. Bohlin is a polio survivor. And certainly there'd be no way to reverse polio. It's not a genetic disease, but I suppose it could be possible to cause new nerve cells to grow in one way or another. But you can ask her later about how God has used that imperfection in her life. Now, there are naturalistic or evolutionary principles that can also be the guiding principles. As we've talked about before, an organism's sole purpose is to survive and reproduce. We are just another animal species, so what we might do with other animal species, why wouldn't we do it with humans? As an individual, you are defined by your genes and how they've interacted with the environment from your earliest days, probably still in the womb, until you go into adulthood and even beyond. Your genes and environment, that's what defines who you are, they would say, okay, evolutionarily. And it's important to realize that the species persists through time, not individuals. If it were deemed that certain individuals might harm the overall species by allowing them to reproduce, we would have every right to prevent them from reproducing. And there's a very sad history here in the U.S. that before Nazi Germany, beginning in the 1920s and 30s, various states were passing laws that would have those with both physical and mental defects preventing them from reproducing. They were involuntarily sterilized. Last of those didn't come off the books until 1965. They were around for a long time. And actually, that's where Nazi Germany got some of their models for their earlier laws from us. And we are just a vehicle for the reproduction of DNA. And if there's something faulty, whatever that might mean, about your DNA, well, maybe we shouldn't allow you to reproduce, as I just mentioned. Now, Gregory Stock, he used to teach at the UCLA School of Medicine. And he said, we know that Homo sapiens is not the final word in primate evolution. But few have grasped that we are on the cusp of profound biological change, poised to transcend our current form and character to destinations of what? New imagination. Whatever we might be able to think of, the human species of the future, we likely could do it. Then there's James Watson, who helped discover the structure of DNA. He said, no one really has the guts to say it, except him, of course. But if we could make better human beings by knowing how to add genes, why shouldn't we? Again, evolutionary biologists. So what is genetic engineering? It's defined as a manipulation or alteration of the genetic structure of a single cell or organism. This refers to the deliberate addition, deletion, or intentional mutation of an organism's DNA sequence to produce a desired result. Now, that last phrase, to produce a desired result is very important here. Nobody has just changed genes just to see what would happen. They always have a particular goal in mind. More commonly, it involves the transfer of a gene from one organism to another. This is neither good nor evil. The nature of the experiments themselves will determine the moral content. Now, my PhD work at University of Texas at Dallas at UTD, my supervisor had a cell line of mouse cells that they had been mutated, and they were unable to use any other sugar but glucose to survive. The whole process of electron transport and all that was just shut down. It wouldn't work. And so if you changed the sugar, it took too much energy to convert that sugar to glucose, and they couldn't survive. So what we did, I isolated human DNA from actual human cancer cells called HeLa, named after Helen Lack from the 1950s. And I grew up these HeLa cells, and then I isolated the whole DNA from those cells. And then we would take that human DNA, and I'm not going to describe the process, but we transfected it into these mouse cells, and we looked for little clones of cells that would start to grow even if we changed the sugar. So something had been corrected, something had been fixed. So I was transferring a human gene into mouse cells. Now there's nothing good or evil about that. It's just doing research, and I didn't create human beings. There's no ethical content to that whatsoever. So, a couple of questions. Is it wrong to place human genes in an animal? Not just a cell, but in an animal. What do you think?
Are you experimenting, or are you trying to do it to help or save the animal? That's the question.
Well,
And I think there's a certain level of consciousness. Like, if an animal's brain is smaller than a peanut, it probably doesn't matter. But, like, if you're doing it something like
a pig's brain is a little bigger than a peanut.
well, that's what I'm saying. Maybe it's a pig, or maybe like, well, if it was like a dog, that's like questionable because dogs are really intelligent, and like other stuff. I don't know. I'm thinking of
Okay.
intelligent animals.
What do you think,
Something like that.
Madison? Any thoughts?
I think to an extent, experimentation is one thing, but trying to make it so animals can like talk and stuff.
So,
One gene does not a human make. A gene is a molecule of DNA. And if you're just transferring one gene in particular into another animal, it's not hard to see that there's anything wrong with that. Transgenic pigs have been made to produce human factor VIII, a blood clotting agent needed by hemophiliacs. They secrete it into their milk, and you just isolate it from the pig milk, and you've got human factor VIII for hemophiliacs. And that's a lot less expensive than the previous model, which you had to take about 90 units of human blood and try to isolate enough human factor VIII to give to a hemophiliac. That was very expensive.
What is transgenic?
Transgenic means you've taken the gene from one organism and transferred it to another. So transgenic. On the other hand, human chimp transgenic organisms designed to begin deciphering the difference between humans and chimps, well, that could be a very different story. What is it you're trying to isolate? What kind of traits, human traits might you be trying to pass along to a chimpanzee? Again, it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong, but you have to investigate further what genes and what's your intention. Is it okay to use animals to produce human organs?
that's kind of the same thing as the embryonic stem cell stuff.
Not exactly.
Is it a living being?
Not exactly.
Well, it's kind of like, could it even ever be a one-to-one? Could it
Yeah.
be- Really? Well, I'm fine with it happening. I'm just not going to have any. So,
You don't want any pig organs?
no, I'll die with a bad liver.
Well, Genesis 3:21, the Lord used animal skins to make clothes for Adam and Eve. So we have used animals in lots of different ways. We even eat them. Okay? Genesis 9:3, he gave permission to use animals for food after the flood. we've used spleens of pigs for insulin for diabetics. But now what we've done is we've taken the human gene for insulin, we've inserted it into various bacteria, and the bacteria expel human insulin as a waste product. And now we're able to give diabetics human insulin, not pig insulin. Over time, you could develop an allergic reaction to pig insulin. Now you give them human insulin, no problem. Now, it seems no difference in using animals for organs. Now, that's already happening. We've had a couple of transplants over the last year or so where they've grown. Now, here's what they do. First of all, you have very specific proteins on the outside of all of your cells that tell you it's human. Then there's a few other that make it unique to you. So what they did is they took the genes for all those human proteins on all your cells, on the cell membrane of all your cells, and they transferred those into pigs, so that the organs would be recognized by a human body as a human organ. Now, it wouldn't be specific to you, so you'd still have to take immunosuppressant drugs so your body doesn't reject the organ. But we've had people now living for several weeks, couple months. They're still working on it, and but it's already being done, this very thing. Should be used for curing genetic diseases. Now, initially you might think that's a great idea, but you also have to approach this very cautiously. Why is that? Well, the church has traditionally been about the business of healing. Orphanages didn't exist until Christianity. Hospitals didn't exist until Christianity in Western Europe. At first, only lethal conditions should be researched for complications. If you have a genetic disease, say cystic fibrosis, anybody know what cystic fibrosis is? It's a disease, a genetic disease that causes excess mucus to be formed in your lungs. And we knew a couple when both our kids were very young, and they had a child with cystic fibrosis, or CF. And well, that excess mucus in the lungs is a breeding ground for bacteria. So you have to find a way to get rid of it. So what they would do is they turned their daughter upside down and whacked her on the back to loosen up all of that excess phlegm, allow her to cough it up to get it out of the lungs.
Don't they have like vibration codes for that?
They do now.
They do now,
They didn't then.
but not then.
Why didn't they just? That's what I would do.
That's not enough. It needed like percussion therapy. Yeah. She still does that a couple times, up to 3 and 4 times a day to loosen.
How old is she?
Now she's, I think, 44.
And she's had children of her own.
Wow. Did that pass on to her kids, or?
Well, if her husband was not a carrier, then it couldn't.
No. Her daughter doesn't have it.
So we must approach with humility and sensitivity towards those already affected by these diseases. For instance, the first time I gave a version of this presentation was at a church up in the state of Washington. They wanted a sermon on genetic engineering, human genetic engineering. So guess who got the call to do that? Well, it was me. And I remember thinking, even before I got up there, of an illustration I gave at the very beginning. And that is, it's almost as if genetic engineering has been, you can think of the ocean and an earthquake under the ocean, which will cause a tsunami. Now, when the tsunami is still in the ocean, you can't see anything because it's so deep. It's only when it gets to shallower water that the water starts piling up and comes above the normal reach of the water. And you could say that previously we were out in the open ocean. You couldn't tell there had been a subterranean earthquake beneath the ocean. But it's almost like now we are on the shore, and you can see that a wave is starting to build out in the distance. And as it gets closer, the wave gets higher and higher. Well, if you haven't, you're dead. You won't be able to get out of the way fast enough. And that's what we need to avoid here with genetic engineering. We need to think ahead. We need to start approaching this with various ethical guidelines and policies so that we don't get caught into a maelstrom of really bad medicine. Now, lethal conditions, even some of that has been backtracked. They did start to do some gene therapy using various viruses to transfer the gene into the human cells of an individual. These were viruses that had caused disease, but they supposedly were made non-lethal, non-disease causing. And, well, guess what? They caused disease. And also, you couldn't control where that gene was inserted. So the gene could have been inserted into the middle of another gene that you need to survive. And then you wouldn't survive because you're missing that gene. And we will always have some imperfections. You're never going to get rid of that. Nobody's going to be able to be born perfect. Should I be allowed to choose the gender of my child? Probably read about this, right? Male or female? There is no transgender.
That's biological sex. Gender is a spectrum, which is not real.
I'm using gender in the original meaning of the word. When I wrote this, there was no transgender stuff. That just didn't exist. Okay?
And I'm going to say no.
No? But you, Shirley?
No.
No. Well, not a simple yes or no answer. If the determination is made of the gender of the child, the sex of the child, after fertilization, a negative result is only rectified by abortion. Whether it's in vitro or actually in the womb, if it's not the gender you want, the only thing you do is get rid of it. But we can separate Y sperm from X-containing sperm. If you then fertilize the eggs in vitro with only sperm that contain the Y chromosome, and you can purify them to about 90%. And as long as a couple says, we'll take either one, but you're 90% more likely to get a male or female on the other side. That change anything for you?
I mean, that's your choice. If you're just like, hey, like, we can have a kid, but we want a boy, and you're doing that, then it's like, come on, like, leave some for the guys who can't. Like, I would say it's probably okay if you're like, if you can't have kids and like you aren't in a position to adopt or anything like that, then like, that's probably okay.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Not much wrong, but little good about it, even if preventing a sex-linked disease. Maybe one of the articles, but quite a few years ago, there was an article on Yahoo News about a couple up in Frisco that they already had 2 kids, both boys, and they both decided they wanted a girl. So they found a fertility specialist in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who'd be willing to, you can do this simply by looking at chromosomes of a developing embryo, which is fairly easy to do. So you can determine that this one's male, this one's female. And you simply implant only the male embryos. What happens to the female embryos? Well, they get frozen away too, but the longest a frozen embryo has been thawed and produced a child has been 5 years frozen. So they have a limited lifespan. They don't last forever once you freeze them away. And this geneticist who was interviewed also said that, well, he had another couple who, well, this was a different fertility specialist in Dallas area. He had another couple who both also wanted a boy, but when the embryo started developing in the womb, it turns out it was a girl.
How do they? But if the whole point is you're going to a specific like doctor specialist to get what you want, then how do you get the wrong thing?
Good question. But he did. Either he chose the wrong embryo or he thought this one was a male and it wasn't. But you could see the possibility for a lawsuit. You promised this, we got this. Now the couple decided to keep the baby, and there were no legal suits followed. Put in place. So if you have a sex-linked disease, are you much likely to be male or female?
Male.
Absolutely. Because you only get one X chromosome, and if the disease is on the X chromosome, where a male is going to express it. Is it ever okay to engineer desired traits?
Like blue eyes, blonde hair.
Mm-hmm.
See where I'm getting with this?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Don't like that, huh?
Yeah, you know who else like that?
What?
Big H, Mr. Adolf Hitler.
He would have liked it, yeah.
He would have liked it. So
Yeah.
That's why I don't.
Well, public opinion is currently against this kind of procedure, but don't count on that lasting. Public opinion changes all the time. We live in a culture where personal choice is idolized. Now, there are plenty of fertility specialists around the country who will allow you to choose the sex of your child by testing the various embryos. Now, when this article came out in Yahoo News quite a few years ago, they mentioned that there was another fertility specialist that had offices in both Los Angeles and New York City. And for a while, he advertised the ability to give you a child with blue eyes. But then nobody was taking him up on it. And so he rescinded that off his website as a possibility. But when gender affirming choices were being made, well, he decided to put it back on the website. So I don't know if he's doing it. But again, you're not changing the embryo. You're simply choosing one that has the genes for blue eyes. Or you're choosing one that has either an XX or XY sex chromosomes. Well, facelifts, tummy tucks, do all that kind of stuff, you know. Better not do too much of it because then you get scarred. Never looks too good after that. Trying to limit genetic engineering to curing disease is not as easy as it sounds. So some people might want to make the case that maybe they had a friend who was dark-haired, brown eyes, and they just seemed to get along better in life because they had blonde hair and blue eyes, and they wanted their kids to have dark hair and brown eyes, so that their child would have an advantage. Well, that's why it'd be difficult to just limit it to curing diseases.
Well, you should love your kid regardless.
Uh-huh.
If you're saying, like, I want to have a kid,
Uh-huh.
and, like, this is going to be my offspring, then, like, just let it be. Like, let the kid just exist. Like, you don't got to mess with it.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion.
Let's say also that we were able to determine the genes, for instance, the intellectual genes that caused various well-known scientists to be brilliant scientists, and you wanted some of those genes implanted into your embryo, and so that you could have a
Smart kid.
world-renowned physicist.
I don't think it's that one.
Well, what if they grew up and didn't want to be a physicist, they wanted to play a trumpet?
That
Then
would
they
be
could be a
good.
really
Would you have wasted your money? Oh, yeah. even this couple that wanted to have a girl up in Frisco, they decked out the nursery in all pink colors and all sorts of stuff like that, expecting what Sue likes to call a girly girl. What if the girl came out of the womb a tomboy? Didn't like anything pink. Didn't want to wear dresses.
Well, until they're a year and a half old, you don't have to worry about that.
No, but if that's what you're planning on,
Yeah.
you're hoping for what the quote unquote girly girl.
Well, most of the time, kids just, whenever they're growing up, whatever they're around is what they adapt to.
For the most part.
If you, like, well, one of my cousins just had a kid, like, 2 years ago, and I've, like, been watching him grow up, and, like, now he's older and he acts just like his dad. And it's, like, shocking how similar they are.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to watch, but, like, because they're together all the time. They spend the most time together. And if you put a kid in a room with a monkey until he was 12 years old, he'd probably act like a monkey. Because that's all he would know.
What do you think about that, Sue?
That's very true in many cases, but still, you've got, rough and tumble dads who have a son who is, the trumpet player. He's an actor and a musician and a dancer, and he didn't want to have anything to do with the rough and tumble. This is what his dad is modeling. It's like, that's not me. I don't like the kind of stuff you like. So sometimes it works out that way, and sometimes they're just very different.
Mm-hmm.
So
Neither of my kids wanted to be a scientist. Neither boy wanted to have anything to do with that.
they did really well in science in school, but no.
Probably because they had a dad who was a professor, and that might have helped a tiny bit.
Yeah, I can help with homework. Yeah,
That would be nice.
and with science experiments. Yeah. So, desired traits. Well, there will always be hard cases and choices to be made. The film Gattaca, Gattaca, is a fairly realistic, futuristic look at what society might be like if you were able to, insert certain genes for various, qualities. In this case, the film was about a young man who he was tested at birth. It was thought that he would have heart disease, and he probably wouldn't live past his 30s. And he wasn't designed to be an athlete or an intellectual or anything like that. But as he grew up, he wanted to be a nuclear physicist. He wanted to work in the space program. But he wasn't genetically engineered for that. So as he approached the possibility of applying for that kind of position, he got the help of an individual who had been designed to be a swimmer, but he'd had a traffic accident and he could no longer do that, even though he was genetically engineered to be that kind of individual. And he would donate blood and urine to this individual. And to get into this space research facility, you put your finger on a little test strip and it would give a quick puncture into your finger and it would test your blood. Make sure you were genetically engineered. Couldn't tell what you're genetically engineered for, but if you were genetically engineered. And so he would get a little bit of this guy's blood and he would have a little patch he'd put underneath and put the blood in there so that that's what was tested, not his own blood. And he also was able to gather urine and put it in a little pouch that he kept inside his pants. And when he went to urinate to have his urine tested to see if, he was given that guy's urine. And eventually, of course, he's found out. And things go kind of haywire after that. But that's the name of the film, Gattaca, and if you're able to find it on Netflix or someplace else, I would suggest you take a look at it. Very realistic portrayal. A single gene, by the way, in mice allows them to learn faster if you have a particular allele for that gene, remember longer, and possess greater curiosity. If you're a human, would that be a good thing?
Yes. I
Yeah.
want the super smart team. Please, next day delivery, Amazon.
But the same protein plays a role in the consequences of strokes, more severe, sensitizes the brain to heroin and cocaine.
I'll still take it.
You still take it?
just keep me away from the coke. And I'll be good.
I
But
was
it-
expecting you to say, I already have the gene for super smart.
I don't know about that one.
Glowfish. We have taken the genes from various sea urchins and other critters that can glow under black light. We've transferred those genes into what are called zebrafish. And here's what they look like under regular light. And this is what they look like under black light. Now, you can buy these in aquarium stores. They're kind of expensive. But you can get a genetically engineered zebrafish. So if we genetically engineer zebrafish, why not humans? Maybe you'd like to have one of those glow-in-the-dark things implanted into you.
No.
No?
I don't want to glow yellow in the dark. I look
Well,
like a minion.
well, you have to be under a black light, so.
Well, then you can't ever go out clubbing with your friends. It's like once you get into the club, then it's just like you're just glowing bright yellow. Everybody's looking at you, and you're like, oh,
So
awkward.
here they are under normal light, and here they are with a UV light, so they actually glow. Cool, huh? Let's see.
Is that glowfish.com? Is that you reorder them?
Yeah. Well, you can just go to the store, get them. Fluorescent color genes originally isolated from a jellyfish and a sea anemone.
Yeah, that's not going in my body.
Do we have the right to change our genetic makeup in any way? Well, our physical bodies do not define the image of God. The image of God is something spiritual, not physical. Correcting a genetic mutation does not alter God's image. However, as I said earlier, transfers of sets of genes designed to alter our physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual capacities, that would be something very different. So usually if you're simply talking about a single gene, that's usually not going to be a big problem. But when you're transferring sets of genes and you're wanting to alter various capacities of the individual, that could be very different. What about superhumans or subhumans? Essentially, this guy in Gattaca, he was looked upon basically as a subhuman. Well, we can't do this right now. But the genetic factors surrounding athletic ability, intelligence, appearance, and personality are still a mystery, but they won't necessarily be a mystery forever. We will continue to research the human genome and begin coming up with the various genes that affect all these characteristics.
Have you ever heard of the show The Boys with like the genetically engineered superheroes?
Oh, no.
It's this show. It's not appropriate at all. But I watched it out of curiosity, like the first couple episodes, and it would make sense. It's like slightly in the future, corporate America. They figured out there's like this compound that they can give to young children,
Uh-huh.
and they grow up with like superpowers.
Okay.
They tell the parents, tell your kids that they were born with a gift, and then we'll like take them like under our wing. They'll turn into superheroes. You'll be millionaires. But it's controlled by a corporate company, and they like sell it to the military. They sell it to whoever they want.
Yeah.
The highest bidder. So what would happen if, let's say, China, Russia? What happens if they get something like that, and they figure it out? Then that could just be like a world war. Like, it's like, hey, like we're gonna launch a nuclear bomb. We have a guy who eats nuclear bombs. Like that would that would be a problem.
That'd be pretty hard to get down. Those are pretty big, you know.
Yeah. We have a guy with a really big mouth. Who eats nuclear bombs.
It's all metal too. I mean, swallowing. Yeah.
He also likes metal. As well.
Okay. By the way, back in 2019, a group of 3 Chinese scientists performed genetic engineering on a set of twins, where there's a certain gene that codes for a protein that allows cells of the body to be invaded by HIV. So what they did is they removed this gene from the set of twins so that they would be immune to HIV. So they did genetically engineer these 2 individuals. Now, not curing a genetic disease, but hopefully providing them with the capacity that would not allow them to be infected with the HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. Now, as soon as they announced their results, even Chinese scientists complained, this is not, nobody has sanctioned this is not a good idea. Basically, those individuals would pass that genetic trait onto their offspring.
Isn't that good though? Isn't nobody,
Well, but you don't know. Now, they used the new genetic technology called CRISPR. So they were able to place the gene or remove the gene right where they wanted it taken out of, so that it wasn't going to hinder anything else. But still, you don't know what the overall effects would be by removing that gene. Like I said, with the gene for mice, maybe there was something else that protein was needed for that you've now removed it, and those cells are not as viable as they used to be. So, and they were basically sent to prison, even in China. It was not sanctioned. The lead scientist went to prison for 3 years. The next scientist went to prison for 2 years, and the other one went to prison for 1 year. I bet they never did that again. Don't think anybody else in China did that again. But you know, what about 50 years to 100 years from now? If we still have a worldview that where right now the naturalistic worldview dominates in society, it does. And if that continues to be the case, then these kinds of experiments are more likely to become more prevalent. E.O. Wilson, sociobiology, he even suggested that in the future we might be able to alter who we are, again, by adding and deleting genes. Or as James Watson suggested, adding genes to make us better. Of course, what's better mean? Well, 1% of births in the U.S. as of several years ago was through in vitro fertilization. Pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD, now available for some genetic diseases and sex selection. So you can't necessarily choose for various traits, but you can have your embryos tested for genetic diseases and for sex selection. Now, we're also creating artificial chromosomes in both mice and human cells, not human individuals, but mice and human cells. If you're able to attach a certain set of genes to an artificial chromosome and implant that into a fertilized egg, you just added genes. No consequence to the organism at all, apart from what you've added. And there could be individual control of gene expression. There's been advances in aging research. Mrs. Bohlin and I are going to turn 72 this year, but I'm not looking to have any genetic engineering for aging issues. 93 international poll. Those who favor therapy enhancement. Only 22% in Israel, 43% in the US, 63% in India, 83% in Thailand are in favor of it. As one ethicist put it, the first thing needful is a correction and deepening of our thinking. Again, even in China, there could be the temptation to select for sex. In their one-child policy, females were routinely either aborted or killed when they were born because they needed a male heir. That's the case also in India. So sex selection in both India and China, I don't know if it's how much it's happening, but I know in India they're recommending it. Now, Christian community does not think or act in an appreciably different manner than society at large. That's what our research at Probe has shown over the last 15 years. That means these genetic technologies will find their way into the church. New source of discrimination to deal with. Church of the enhanced, church of the unenhanced. What would you do if, and this happened in our case, the first child that was born in our previous church quite a while, several decades ago, was from IVF, in vitro fertilization. Some people did not want that child in the various nursery rooms. Wasn't born naturally. And I had to come into play and say, look, you may argue with how this child was brought into existence, but don't punish the child. They had nothing to do with it. Enhanced and unenhanced will still all need the gospel. So genetic enhancement is reality. Society's view of human dignity will profoundly challenged and altered. Church will be challenged to extend grace and mercy to enhanced and unenhanced in its midst. Now, we're still projecting into the future here. Gospel will still need to be preached to all men and women, or if you prefer, all women and men. We have a few minutes left. Thoughts, comments, complaints, questions?
Isn't there another?
Oh, human cloning. Is that in the outline?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, quickly here.
Quite a bit.
Quickly, okay. I thought it was just an engineering. Dolly the sheep was cloned in, this was 1997, so she was cloned in 1996. And they took a mammary gland cell from cell that had already been frozen away for 6 years. They removed the nucleus, okay? They starved the cells, okay? They fused it with an egg that had its nucleus taken out, and they got a potential embryo. Very inefficient. Over almost 300 fusions, only one lamb. People question how long would Dolly live? Well, she had to be put down early because she developed a severe arthritis because she ended up being so valuable to the commercial industry, advertising industry, that they never let her out in the pasture. She was fertile. Other clones are large and fragile with subtle genetic abnormalities. Dolly's creators announced she developed premature arthritis. 2 individuals in those years, early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, said they were working on cloning humans. We never heard from them. No success. It's inevitable that someone will try and someone will succeed, predicts Dolores Slam, an infertility expert at Baylor University. The consensus among biotechnology specialists is that within a few years, some scientists believe in a few months, the news will break of the birth of the first human clone. Well, that never happened. Doug Dorner, why? Sterile because of leukemia treatment at age 16. The more he read, the more excited he got. Technology saved my life when I was 16, he says, but at the cost of his fertility. I think technology should help me have a kid. That's a fair trade. I love Randolph Wicker. I can thumb my nose at Mr. Death and say, you might get me, but you're not going to get all of me. The special formula that is me will live on into another lifetime. It's a partial triumph over death. I would leave my imprint not in sand, but in cement.
Wow.
A little arrogant, do you think?
Just a little.
Just a little.
Very humble.
Jack Barker. I've come to the conclusion that I don't need a partner, but can still have a child. A clone would be the perfect child to have because I know exactly what I'm getting. But it'll be raised in a completely different environment. You won't get yourself back. It doesn't work that way. Cloning he hopes might even let him improve on the original. I have had bad allergies and asthma. It'd be nice to have a kid like you, but with a few improvements.
The world could do a lot better with that guy.
Same-sex couples. Okay. Source of organs for transplants. You could have yourself, your child clone in case they would need organs in the future. Get an organ from your clone.
That's really terrible.
Uh-huh. Why not? We're just another animal species. Children for childless couples is what you'll hear. Distinction between man and animals. Child becomes a commodity to be designed, sold, and marketed. When all this stuff was started to develop in the early 2000s, people actually talked about cloning lots of different kids and then creating a catalog and including pictures and characteristics of cloned children. And since there's several copies of that clone, you could have that child. No matter how much animal experimentation is done, human embryos will have to be sacrificed. There's no question about that. People cloned for certain traits will have high expectations to express those traits and to pursue them. Clones are identical twins, not parent and child. Let's just say that Mrs. Bohlin and I couldn't have any kids, and so we decided to clone ourselves. So I got a clone of me and a clone of her. And as those kids are reaching their later teenage years and early adulthood, Mrs. Bohlin meets with a tragic accident and is killed. What would be wrong with me marrying her younger clone?
First of all, bro, that's creepy. Like if your wife is dead and there's a little her.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Well, reminds me a lot of her.
It's not her. It's not the same.
But genetically it's the same. But that's not incest.
Because you marry someone for their genetics.
That wouldn't be incest because
Holy creep.
that little girl is not my daughter. It's my wife's identical twin.
Would your wife be okay with that happening if she was still alive?
Probably not.
Is she looking down at you and having smiling or not?
Well, maybe I could divorce her and marry the younger one, you know?
Okay.
So if you are totally creeped out by that scenario,
That's a good.
it is a good thing. It was good for you to see the potential problems with that.
So there's a summary sheet there. And so as Arthur Kaplan said, the short answer to cloning question says, S.S. Kaplan, is that anybody who clones somebody today should be arrested. Be barbaric human experimentation. It would be killing fetuses and embryos for no purpose, none except for curiosity. But if you can't agree that that's wrong to do, and if the media can't agree to condemn rather than gawk, that's a condemnation of us all. The drive toward human cloning is being powered by a selfish, mythical right to total reproductive freedom. A blind drive toward cures at any cost, and further fueled by a profound lack of moral courage on the part of science and society. We are unwilling to say that there are some experiments we will not perform. This last one. Rebecca, 30-something in San Francisco Bay Area resident, spent 7 years trying to conceive a child with her husband. Having been to hell and back with IVF treatment, Rebecca is now as thoroughly committed to cloning as she is to Christianity. It's in the Bible. Be fruitful and multiply, she says. People say you're playing God, but we're not. We're using the raw materials the good Lord gave us. What does a doctor do when the heart has stopped? They have to do direct massage to the heart. You could say the doctor's playing God, but we save a life. With human cloning, we're not so much saving a life as creating a new being by manipulation of the raw materials, DNA, the blueprint. You're simply using it in a more creative manner. So even Christians,
One way to justify it.
we can justify anything.